Welcome back to Nature Documentary for Sleep. If you enjoy these quiet expeditions, leave a comment and consider liking and subscribing. Tonight, you're stepping into Lençóis Maranhenses, where a desert keeps filling with fresh water. It's just before dawn, and you're rattling out from Badarinas toward a horizon that looks impossible for this latitude. The air is damp. The wind carries a hint of river mud, and the sand under your feet feels newly coned. You climb the first ridge in the cool hours, because later, the heat will flatten your decisions. From the crest, you spot dark lagoons pooled between white dunes, clear enough to show the bottom. You walk down into a sheltered bowl where footsteps go quiet, and you test the water because the shortest route goes through it. Every step reminds you the dunes aren't fixed landmarks. They're wind-built ridges that shift and erase your line of travel. So, how does rain stay here at all? And what specific balance of infiltration, basin shape, and seasonal timing makes these lagoons persist before they drain away? Your guide doesn't answer with a lecture. He answers by moving. Because in a place like this, explanations come with blisters. His headlamp bobs once, then twice, and you follow it down the slope. The sand is cool on top, then suddenly colder, like it remembers last night. A small gust slides over the ridge behind you, and your footprints soften at the edges. That is your first concrete warning. This terrain edits you while you are still writing yourself into it. You step into the basin, and the air changes. The wind loses interest, and everything becomes a quiet room made of sand. Then you hear it. Not waves, not river, just a soft lap where water touches a shore. The lagoon is closer than it looked from above, and darker too. It is not the cheerful blue of a postcard. It is a bruise-colored mirror holding the last of the night sky. You kneel and touch it with your fingers, expecting salt, expecting coastal bite. Instead, it is plain, cool, and almost sweet on the skin. Fresh water, sitting in a desert, like someone forgot to turn off a faucet. The guide points at your boots, then at the narrow waist of the lagoon. He is offering you a decision without saying the words. Go around and lose time, or go through and lose warmth. You look at the sand path around the edge, and you can already see your future in it. It is longer than it looks, and it climbs a ridge you will hate later. So you choose the water. You step in, slow, testing for sudden drop-offs. The bottom is firm at first, then turns silky, and your foot sinks an inch. Cold climbs your shins, and your calves tense in surprise. The chill feels personal, like the lagoon is taking a small revenge for the sun it will endure. Halfway across, you notice how clear it is. Not just clear, but clean, as if the sand filtered it on purpose. You can see tiny ripples of dune reflected on the bottom, like a second landscape. And you realize this is the first piece of the answer. The dunes are not solid walls. They are a sieve, stacked into hills, letting rain pass down and then trapping it. The guide taps the sand with his toe. When you reach the far edge, water disappears into it. He says, with a shrug that means obviously. He tells you the sand here is mostly quartz, ground down and stubborn. It does not dissolve. It does not drink the way clay drinks. It lets water slip through, then holds it above deeper layers that drain slower. You picture it like a giant beach towel laid over a table. Rain falls, soaks in, and pools where the fabric sags. And in this place, the fabric always sags between ridges. You climb out, and your pants drip quietly. The wet fabric makes the morning air feel sharper. You take 3 steps, and sand sticks to your shins like flour on dough. That stickiness is your second warning. The ground is changing phase already, from cool powder to something that will soon burn. As you walk, the guide keeps you in the troughs between dunes. Down here, you are sheltered from wind, but you pay for it in navigation. Every curve looks like the last curve. Every hollow feels designed to trap you gently, like a soft maze. You glance back once, and the crest you came from already seems less distinct. Not gone, just demoted, blended back into the white crowd. The guide notices your look and points at the horizon without turning. Stay forward, his gesture says. Behind you is not a memory you can trust. The first light thickens, and the dunes stop being gray and become truly white. Not white like paper, white like sun-bleached bone. From above, this field looks smooth, like frosting on a cake. From inside it, it looks like a frozen ocean mid-wave. The wind has combed the surface into ripples, and each ripple catches light differently. You keep moving because you came early for a reason. Later, the heat will scramble distance, and you will start making bad bargains. You crest another ridge, and the next lagoon appears. Longer, brighter, more confident. It sits in a trough, like a blade laid in a sheath. You feel your mouth water. And that is not just thirst, it is relief. Water means a landmark. Water means you can re-find yourself. But it also means another decision, another cold crossing, another delay. You ask the guide how long these lagoons last. He tells you, with the patience of someone who has said this many times. They fill during the rainy season, then shrink when the dry months take over. You are here in the brief overlap when the sky has given enough and the sand has not yet stolen it back. It sounds balanced, like a careful schedule. It is not careful. It is a race. The water is always losing, just not yet. You walk along the rim of the lagoon instead of straight through. This time you choose speed over cold. The guide nods once, approving the choice, but his eyes stay on the sky. You follow his gaze and notice something you missed earlier. Clouds are building inland, low and puffy, too early for comfort. They flatten the light, turning the dunes into a glare without shadows. Shadow is what gives you shape out here. Without it, the landscape becomes a blank sheet, and you become a pencil mark that can be erased. You take a longer sip from your bottle than you meant to. The guide clicks his tongue softly, not scolding, just reminding you that water is time. You tighten the cap, and you keep walking. The sand changes underfoot again. Near the lagoon, it is damp and packed, almost friendly. Farther from it, it loosens, and your foot slides backward with every step uphill. You realize something mildly insulting about dunes. They make you pay for elevation twice. Once going up, and once again when you slide down a little after each step. You reach a ridge and stop, pretending it is for the view. Really, It is to let your lungs catch up. The air is heavy with moisture, and it clings inside your nose. This is a desert that refuses to behave like one. You can sweat here without the sweat evaporating fast enough to cool you, so the heat will not just bake you, it will steam you. The guide walks a few paces ahead and points down. A line of darker sand runs through the trough like a path. He tells you to follow that color, not the shape of dunes. Darker sand holds moisture longer. Moisture means lower ground, and lower ground often means a basin. Basins are where the water waits. You do as told, and the route feels suddenly more intentional. Not easy, but readable. You start to see the place the way locals see it, as a system, not a vista. Wind pushes sand inland from the coast, over years, over decades, always rearranging. Rain falls hard for part of the year, filling the low spots faster than they drain. Then sun returns like a debt collector, and the lagoons shrink back into the sand. It is a seasonal magic trick that depends on timing, and timing is something your body understands more than your brain does, because now your stomach reminds you it is still early, but not that early. You eat a small bar, and it tastes like cardboard and survival. The guide eats nothing, or at least nothing you see. He moves like someone who has already learned not to argue with heat. As the morning builds, the wind picks up on the crests. It is not strong enough to knock you over. It is strong enough to sandblast your attention. Fine grains skitter across the ridge like insects, chasing each other in lines. They tap softly against your legs. You think, for a moment, of the dunes as stable hills. Then you watch the surface literally move, grains migrating in a constant, thin sheet. This place is not still. It is just slow enough to look calm. You drop into another trough, and the sound of wind cuts off again. The quiet is so complete you hear your own fabric creak. You also hear something else, faint, like distant applause. The guide stops and listens. He tilts his head, then points forward and slightly left. Water, he says, and starts walking with new purpose. You follow, and the trough opens into a wider basin. A lagoon appears, but smaller than expected, tucked in the shadow of a dune face. The water is a brighter blue now, because the sky is brighter, and because the bottom is pale sand, reflecting light back up. It looks safe. It looks like a pool someone built for you. But when you step closer, you see the edge is undercut in places. Tiny collapses, little sand cliffs, as if the water has been nibbling. The guide squats and drags a finger through the wet sand. He shows you how it holds together for a second, then slumps. He is showing you the second part of the answer. Infiltration is not just water soaking down. It is also sand losing its grip when it gets saturated. Here, the boundary between solid and liquid is negotiable. You step back instinctively, and your heel slides. Not much, just enough to make your stomach tighten. Congratulations, you think you are on a surface that can decide to move. You do not need a landslide. A small slump is enough to ruin an ankle. The guide chooses a crossing point where the shore is shallow and wide. He looks at you again. Another decision offered. Cross here or climb high and detour. You feel the sun on your shoulders now. Stronger, more direct. You choose the crossing again because the detour would cost too much. You step in, and the water is warmer than the first lagoon. Not warm, just less shocking. You wade slowly, feeling for soft spots. The bottom is smooth, and your toes stir silt that blooms like smoke. For a moment, you cannot see your feet. Your brain does not like that. It is a small, ancient discomfort. The fear of stepping on what you cannot identify. Then the silt settles, and your feet return, ordinary and pale under blue water. On the far side, you climb out, and the breeze hits your wet clothes. You shiver despite the strengthening sun. That shiver is useful. It reminds you that heat can be interrupted here, suddenly, without permission. Storms can do it. Shade can do it. Night will do it later, whether you are ready or not. You keep walking, and the dunes start to stretch longer, forming ridges that run parallel. You notice it because your path keeps bending, as if the landscape is steering you. This is not random, your guide says. The trade winds push from a consistent direction, combing the dunes into long lines. So when you think you are walking straight, you are often walking with the grain. When you try to cut across, you fight the whole system. You test that idea by angling up a ridge at a sharper angle. Your foot slips back, and you laugh once, dry and tired already. The guide gives you a look that says, "Yes, that is what I meant." You return to the easier corridor, humbled by sand. The sky brightens further, and the clouds you saw earlier smear into a pale cover. It is not shade. It is worse. It is diffuse light, the kind that removes contrast. The dunes lose their crisp edges, and distance becomes harder to judge. You look ahead, trying to pick a distinctive crest. Every crest looks like it could be the one you want, or the one that wastes an hour. The guide checks something in his hand, a simple phone, kept in airplane mode to save battery. He is using it like a compass and a memory aid, not like a rescue plan. Out here, signal is a rumor. Battery is a limited life, and the wind does not care about your charging cable. He pockets it quickly, like he does not want you to depend on it. Instead, he points to a distant, darker patch, barely visible. He tells you that is vegetation, the edge of the dune field. Not the end, exactly, but a boundary where roots start to pin sand down. That is the direction you need to keep in your bones, because the dunes will try to persuade you otherwise. You walk again, steady, and you start to feel the heat arrive. For real. It begins at the top of your head, then spreads down your neck. Your water bottle feels warmer against your side. The sand under your feet becomes less forgiving. Each step sinks just enough to steal energy. Not dramatic, just relentless, the way bureaucracy steals hours. You check the sun, and your brain does the math it always does in exposed places. How many hours until it is unbearable? How many hours until you are out of easy water? How many mistakes can you afford? The guide stops at the crest of a tall ridge and gestures for you to join him. When you reach him, he points along the line of dunes. Far away, you can see a chain of lagoons glinting between ridges like dropped glass. He names one you are aiming for, a well-known lagoon that acts like a waypoint. You repeat the name under your breath to make it stick. Names help places become real, but the dunes do not care what you call them. They will still rearrange themselves when the wind feels like it. You start down into the next trough, and something small goes wrong immediately. Your foot catches on a patch of crusted sand left by evaporated water. It breaks under you, and you stumble forward. You catch yourself, but your ankle twists slightly. Not an injury, not yet, but a warning shot. In a city, you would ignore it. Out here, you pay attention because small damage compounds fast. The guide slows his pace without making a show of it. He angles toward firmer sand near another shallow, wet area, giving you a better surface. You adjust your stride, and the ankle holds. You keep moving, and you try not to think about how far you are from anything solid. The next lagoon comes into view, and it is wider than the others. Its surface is ruffled by a light breeze, breaking the reflection. The water looks inviting in the way a break looks inviting. But you notice the shoreline is irregular. Little fingers of water creep into the sand. The shoreline does not curve like a bowl. It branches. It makes little inlets, little tongues of water, like the lagoon is feeling for weak spots. You squat and watch one of those tongues breathe. It pushes forward a few inches, then retreats, then pushes again. Not from tides, from wind. A small breeze presses on the surface, and the water answers by exploring the sand. You expected a clean edge, like a pool. Instead, you get a negotiation line, where wet sand pretends to be solid until it is not. Your guide walks the edge without stepping into it. He drags his heel lightly, testing the firmness. He is reading the shoreline like a sentence written in a language you almost know. He points at a spot where the sand is darker, tighter, less honeycombed. Cross there, his gesture says, if you insist on crossing. You look at the lagoon again, wider now, and the far side feels farther than it should. This is the trick of clear water in a white world. It makes distance feel optional. It makes you forget that every crossing has a cost. You run your tongue over your teeth, tasting dried sweat. Your body wants the water for drinking, for cooling, for some kind of reset. Your brain wants to keep moving before the midday heat closes its fist. So you do the human thing. You choose the option that feels efficient, and then you pay the hidden fees. You step in where the guide indicated. The water takes you up to your knees immediately. Not alarming, just decisive. The bottom holds firm sand, then a patch that yields like a sponge. Your foot sinks, slow, and the water clouds around your ankle. You pause and shift your weight back, and the sand releases you reluctantly. The lagoon is not trying to swallow you. It is simply not built to carry you. It is built to sit here briefly and then disappear. You take another step, more careful. Your calves tighten with each movement, like you are walking through resistance bands. Halfway across, the breeze picks up. The surface roughens, and the little wavelets slap your legs. It is not cold now. It is just cool enough to remind you that weather can change faster than plans. You reach the far side and climb out, dripping again. The sand clings to you in a new way, heavy grains sticking to wet fabric. You feel like you are wearing the place. You take a few steps, and the wetness begins to steam off you. Not visible steam, but a sensation, like your skin is exhaling. You glance back, and the lagoon looks innocent again. It always does, once you are not in it. The guide does not let you stare long. He tilts his head toward the ridges ahead. Longer lines now, more parallel. The dunes are organizing themselves into corridors, and those corridors are trying to funnel you. You climb a ridge and stop at the crest because the view demands it, or because your legs do. From up here, the field is too clean. It looks like a cloth thrown over something lumpy. You can see lagoons scattered in the folds, bright blue cuts in the white. You can also see how easy it would be to get turned around. Every ridge points somewhere, not necessarily where you need to go. And now the light is worse. That cloud layer has thickened into a pale ceiling. It is not storm cloud, not yet. It is the kind of high haze that erases the shadows you use to judge slope. Without shadow, a dune can be a gentle rise or a steep wall until you are already climbing it. Your guide points toward the named lagoon again, the waypoint you repeated earlier. He traces the direction with 2 fingers, then drops his hand. No drama, just insistence. You start walking and you decide to save time. This is where you make the first real mistake. It is not cinematic. It is not even interesting. It is the kind of error that happens when your brain gets tired of being careful. You look at the long ridges ahead and you decide to cut across them. Not fully against your guide, not openly rebellious, just a little angled shortcut to keep the sun behind you, to keep the direction clean. The guide hesitates for half a second. He does not argue. He follows. And that is the dangerous part, because now the responsibility feels shared, and you stop checking yourself. You descend into a trough, then climb the next ridge at an angle. The sand gives way. Every step up slides half a step back. Your thighs start to burn, not with heat, but with effort. You crest the ridge and drop down, then do it again. Climb, slide, crest, drop. It is like walking up an escalator that hates you. You tell yourself it is fine because you are making progress. But progress in dunes is a strange currency. You spend energy fast and you gain distance slowly. And the landscape gives you no receipt. The wind is stronger on these exposed crossings. It hits you in the face, then in the side, changing with the ridge shape. It carries sand that taps at your lips and sticks to your sweat. Your eyes narrow without you deciding to. You blink more, and your lashes start to gather grit. Your guide keeps looking at the horizon, not the scenic horizon, the functional one. The line where white meets slightly darker white. The faint suggestion of vegetation. You keep cutting across, and you start to notice something unsettling. Your footprints behind you are fading. Not slowly, quickly. A thin sheet of sand skims along the surface like a moving veil. It fills the edges of your steps, rounds them, softens them. The place deletes your path as you create it. That is not poetry. That is logistics. If you needed to turn back, you would be turning back into a blank page. You keep going anyway because you are already committed. That is how dunes get you. Not with cliffs or predators, with small commitments that become inconvenient to reverse. The heat grows teeth around late morning. The breeze does not cool you anymore. It just dries the sweat into salt on your skin. Your shirt sticks, then loosens, then sticks again. Your water bottle feels lighter. Not because the plastic changed, but because you did. You are carrying less margin now. You crest another ridge, expecting to see the named lagoon. You have been aiming for it like a promise. You picture it before you see it. A long blue slash, a familiar shape, a psychological relief. But when you reach the top, there is nothing. no bright water, no dark line. Just more dunes folding away in every direction like a sleeping animal. You stand still, and the first emotion is disbelief. You scan left, then right, then straight ahead again, as if the lagoon might appear if you look correctly. Your guide does not react dramatically. He just watches your face, then the dunes, then the sky. He pulls the phone out again, checks it quickly, and puts it away. His expression does not change, but his pace does. He angles your route subtly, guiding you into a different trough. You realize what happened, not in a sudden revelation, but in a quiet, sinking feeling. You crossed ridges you did not need to cross, and you dropped into the wrong set of basins. Drainage is not just a river thing here. It is a dune thing. Each trough is its own little catchment, its own bowl waiting for rain. And you, congratulations, have walked into the wrong bowl. You want to apologize. You also want to pretend it is not a big deal. The guide makes it easy for you. He does not scold. He simply pivots as if detours are part of the job. But the consequences show up immediately, like a bill slid under the door. The detour means more ridge travel, more exposed travel, more time under a sun that is climbing toward its worst hours. The day's margin collapses quietly, without announcement. You keep moving. You aim for darker patches, for the subtle low lines where moisture lingers. Your guide's eyes track the sand like he can see under it. He points out small clues. A faint green smear in the distance. A cluster of wind ripples that curve differently, the way a ridge shoulder leans. You start to notice those things too, but it feels like learning to read while running. Your legs are now warm all the way through. Not sore yet, just steadily taxed. The climb and slide cycle continues, and you begin to hate the sound of your own breath. It is too loud in a place that is otherwise quiet. The wind drops suddenly as you move into a deeper trough. The air becomes heavy, humid, still. It feels like someone closed a door. You stop at the bottom, instinctively. Still air and heat is never a gift. It is a warning. You look up and see the sky changing. The pale haze is thickening, lowering. The light goes flat, then dimmer, like someone turning down a lamp. The guide listens, not for thunder, but for something else. For rain that has not arrived yet. You realize the place has been quiet about its weather until now. It let you think the day was stable, and now it is adjusting the terms. You climb to the next crest, and you pause again, not for the view, for the breeze that still exists up here. From this higher line, you see something that makes your throat tighten. A darker patch in the dunes ahead. Not vegetation, not shadow, a place where the sand looks heavier, as if soaked. Your guide points at it. Water, he says again, but this time his tone is different. Not reassurance, not relief, direction. You follow the line down, and you realize what you were hearing earlier, that faint applause. It is not waves. It is wind raking over a larger water surface, a soft hiss of ripples traveling. You drop into the trough, and the air cools slightly. The basin widens. The sand underfoot becomes packed and darker. Your steps sound different, more muffled, like walking on felt. Then the lagoon appears. It is larger than the last ones. Not long and thin, but broad, a real bowl of water. The color is deeper, a richer blue, because the basin is deeper. This is the kind of lagoon that makes tourists make noises. But you are not in a tourist moment anymore. You are in a timing moment. The guide walks to the edge and crouches. He scoops water in his hand, lets it run through his fingers. He watches how fast it disappears into the sand at the shoreline. Then he stands and looks across. The crossing points are not obvious. The shoreline shelves down gradually, then drops. The far side is a bright band of sand that looks close until you start calculating steps. You ask with your eyes if you are crossing this one. The guide shakes his head. Not now. He points to the right along the edge where the basin narrows. He is choosing a route that keeps you near water without committing to swimming. You follow. The sand along the edge is firm enough to walk, but it crumbles if you step too close. The water undercuts it in little scallops. You can see where yesterday's waterline was, a faint, darker stain above the current edge. That means the lagoon is already shrinking, or it rose and fell recently. You do not know which. The guide does, or he thinks he does. He keeps you moving. The sun is now directly overhead, a white pressure. The clouds diffuse it, making it feel like light is coming from everywhere. There is no shade. The dunes reflect brightness upward, so even your eyes feel hot. You drink again, smaller sips now. You start to ration without saying the word. Your guide stops at the narrow waist of the lagoon. Here, the water is shallower, and the far side looks reachable without drama. He gestures. This is the crossing. You step in, and the water is unexpectedly cold again. Not mountain cold, but storm cold, the kind that suggests recent rain somewhere nearby. Your skin tightens. Your breathing changes. You wade fast because standing still makes the cold creep upward. Halfway across, you look down and you see something that makes you stop. Tiny movement, a flicker near the bottom. At first, you think it is your own ripples. Then you see it again, a darting shape, a small fish in a lagoon that will disappear. Your brain tries to reject it. Fish belong in rivers, in permanent lakes, in oceans. Not here. Not in a basin of rainwater between migrating dunes. But there it is. It darts, pauses, darts again. Your guide notices your stare. He says something simple, almost casual. They wait, he says. They survive the dry months as eggs, buried in damp sand, dormant. Then the rains return. The lagoons refill, and the eggs hatch. Life timed to absence. Life that treats disappearance as part of the schedule. You stand there, knee-deep, thinking about how insulting that is. You struggle to plan a day out here. These fish plan their whole existence around vanishing water. You keep moving, and you climb out on the far side. Your wet clothes cling again. The breeze on the ridge feels like mercy. You walk, and you start to notice your own mental drift. Heat does that. So does uniform scenery. Your attention wants to loosen. Your thoughts want to go soft. But this is exactly when you cannot afford softness. So you give yourself little tasks. Count your steps to the next ripple line. Pick a ridge point and hold it. Check the wind direction on your cheek. Listen for water sounds. Anything to keep your brain from wandering off into the white. The guide leads you along the crest of a dune line now. Not high peaks, but shoulders. Stable enough. The wind up here is constant. It combs the sand into ripples that all point the same way, like fingerprints. You run your hand over them and feel the grain shift. It is not hard. It is not fixed. It is just arranged. That is the core truth here. Everything is arranged temporarily. You keep going and you begin to feel the weight of the mistake you made earlier. Not guilt, just math. The detour has pushed you into the hottest part of the day. Your shadow is a small dark stain under you, useless for reading slope. The clouds that seemed harmless now thicken again, darker in patches. The air grows more humid and your sweat stops evaporating. You feel damp, then hotter, then damp again. You start to smell the place differently. Not just sand, a faint earthy scent, like wet riverbank. It is subtle, but it is there. It reminds you that this dune field is not isolated. It is fed. It is connected to water systems that you cannot see. The guide points toward the far horizon again. You see faintly a darker smear, not just vegetation, a line of trees maybe, or scrub. It looks like an exit, but the distance is still too big to comfort you. You are not walking to a line. You are walking to a series of decisions between now and then. And then the sky finally admits what it has been building. A low rumble, distant, not loud enough to scare you yet, just loud enough to make you look up. The cloud ceiling is no longer uniform. It is bruising into slate in one direction, darker, thicker. A squall forming inland. Fast. The guide stops and watches the horizon, calculating. You can see the change in him. He is no longer just guiding. He is adjusting. Rain out here is not just relief. It is an editor. It changes lagoon levels. It changes sand firmness. It changes which ridges slump. It changes which basins connect. You have been walking on a map that is already temporary. Rain makes it temporary on a shorter timeline. The guide points to a dune face ahead, a steep slope with a lee side sheltered from wind. He says one word that matters: wait. You do not want to wait. Waiting feels like wasting daylight, but you also do not want to be on a ridge when lightning arrives. You have seen enough open places to respect that rule. So, you follow him down into a lower hollow, tight against the dune's sheltered side. The air here is still. The sand is finer. You can feel it shifting under your boots, whispering. You crouch, and the guide checks your gear, making sure nothing will soak easily. He is practical, almost boring about it. That is how you know it is serious. The first drops come heavy and warm, splattering dark spots into the pale sand. Then more. Then suddenly, it is raining like someone tipped a bucket over the world. The sound is immediate. Sand, normally quiet, becomes loud under rain. Each drop hits, and the surface changes. It is like watching a crowd form. The pale crust turns darker. Tiny rivulets begin to form, not because sand loves runoff, but because the rain is too fast at first. The water cannot infiltrate quickly enough, so for a few minutes, you get streams in a desert, thin, temporary threads racing down the dune face. They carve shallow channels that will vanish later, but right now they are real. You watch the dune face slump in small slides. Not dramatic collapse, just sections of sand losing cohesion and slipping. The shape of the dune softens. edges round off. The place becomes slightly different in front of your eyes. This is the irreversible part. Not because the dunes will never look sharp again. They will, but because the specific ridges you used for orientation are being sanded down and redrawn. Your map is being edited, and you are sitting inside the edit. The rain keeps coming. It hits your arms, your neck, your hair. It cools you, but it also chills you. You feel your body temperature drop fast because your clothes were already damp from lagoon crossings. Now you are wet again, fully. The wind that returns with the squall cuts through the hollow, swirling. It throws fine sand into the rain, and you feel grit on your teeth. Congratulations. You have found the rare weather combination of being rained on and sandblasted at the same time. Lightning flickers far off, muted by cloud thickness. Thunder follows, slow and heavy. It is not directly overhead, but it is close enough to make the hair on your arms rise. You stay low. You keep away from the ridgeline. Your guide's posture is calm, but his eyes are alert. He is listening for the pattern. How fast is it moving? How long will it last? Is it passing or building? The rain begins to shift from a hard sheet to pulses. In between pulses, you can see the sand drinking. Water that had been running on the surface now vanishes into the dune like it was never there. This is infiltration made visible by contrast. The rain hits, the sand darkens, then the dark patch spreads downward as water sinks. It is like watching ink soak through paper. Under your feet, fresh water is collecting in lenses, thin layers trapped above deeper, slower draining material. You cannot see those layers, but the lagoons prove they exist. You are sitting on a sponge with a memory, and every drop that sinks now will reappear later in the basins. The squall begins to weaken, not fully gone, but less violent. The thunder grows more distant. The rain becomes a steady patter. Then, after one last heavy burst, it eases. The clouds still hang low, but the worst has passed. The air feels suddenly clean, cooler, and heavier with moisture. You stand and stretch your legs. Your boots feel heavier, sand stuck to everything. The guide points toward the basin you were heading for. You move again because you have to, but now the surface is different. Wet sand packs underfoot. It stops squeaking when you step and starts thudding like you are walking on bread dough. The packed surface is easier on your legs and worse for your assumptions, because firm sand here does not mean safety. It means the water has glued the grains together temporarily, and temporary is the only permanent feature you have. You follow the guide along the dune shoulder, and the world smells washed. That river mud scent returns, stronger now, like the storm shook the whole system awake. The air is cooler for a few minutes, and you feel a dangerous optimism rise. You start thinking in straight lines again. You start believing you can make up time. Congratulations, your brain has resumed planning in a place that does not honor plans. The guide keeps you low, out of the worst wind. He chooses the lee side of ridges, where the sand stayed smoother under the rain. Each crest you peek over looks subtly different than it did before. Not enough to alarm a tourist, enough to confuse someone who was using the shape of dunes as a compass. You realize the storm did not just cool you down, it rubbed out part of your memory. The basin ahead opens like a shallow amphitheater. The white walls slope down, and the floor is darker, damp, with new water. In the center sits a lagoon that was not this full an hour ago. You can tell by the fresh shoreline, the wet stain climbing higher on the sand. The lagoon looks colder too, darker blue, like it is holding the storm inside it. The guide stops at the rim and watches the surface. Wind pushes a thin texture across it, and the water answers with small waves that slap quietly. He points to the far side, then shakes his head. Not there, his gesture says. He points to the left where the basin narrows and the shoreline shelves more gently. That is the crossing he trusts, if you have to cross at all. You walk the rim first because you are learning. You are learning that the shortest line on a map is the longest line in reality. The edge is littered with tiny collapses, fresh sand clumps that look like they fell minutes ago. Storm water has undercut the lip, and gravity is doing what gravity does. You kneel and press your fingers into the wet sand. It holds shape for a breath, then slumps like tired cake. This is what saturation does here. Water takes away friction, and dunes lose their posture. A mountain collapses in rock falls when it gets too steep. A dune collapses when it gets too wet, or too dry, or too pushed. It is always one gust away from reorganizing itself. You move on, and the guide sets a pace that feels boring. Boring is the goal now. After a storm, the exciting options are usually the ones that get you hurt. As you reach the narrow part of the lagoon, you can see the bottom clearly. The sand slopes down in a smooth bowl. No weeds, no rocks, nothing to grab. The guide steps in first, not bravely, just to test. Water rises to his knees, then to mid-thigh, and he stops. He shifts his weight, feeling for that soft sponge zone. He backs up one step, finds firmer ground, and points. Follow exactly, his hand says. Your turn. You step in, and the water is sharp with cold. Not freezing, but cold enough to make your calves tense hard. You can feel your skin tighten, and your breathing gets shallow for a moment. The storm did not cool the water by magic. It poured new water in, directly from the sky, and mixed it into the basin. Fresh water does not need glaciers to feel cold. It just needs to arrive suddenly and have no warm rocks to lean against. Halfway through, your foot finds a soft patch. It sinks an inch, then two, slow and unwilling. Silt blooms around your ankle, and the clear blue turns milky for a moment. You freeze because your body hates uncertainty underwater. The guide turns his head, sees your pause, and lifts his hand low. Not a wave, a calming signal. Shift your weight back, he mouths. You do. The sand releases you, and you step sideways. Feeling for firmer bottom, you find it and keep moving. Careful. When you climb out on the far side, your pants cling like a wet rag. Wind hits you, and you shiver hard despite the heat still lurking. That shiver is your body spending fuel. It is the bill for being wet in moving air. You walk because walking is heat. You do not sit. Sitting is how chill turns into stupidity. The guide angles you toward higher ground again, not the ridgetop, but the shoulder. He is threading a line between lightning risk and flooding risk. You realize you are no longer just navigating dunes. You are navigating a storm aftermath, a new version of the place that did not exist this morning. The sky tries to brighten again, but the cloud cover stays thick and smeared. The sun is a pale coin behind it, still hot, just less honest. Steam rises from the sand in tiny, invisible breaths, and humidity thickens. Your wet clothes do not dry, they ferment. You can smell yourself, salt and damp fabric, and a faint sourness. The dunes do not care. The dunes keep breathing sand. On the next crest, the guide stops and points out a detail you would miss. A thin line of darker sand runs across the slope like someone drew it with a brush. That is last night's runoff path, he says. Not a river, a moment. It means water moved across the surface here before it sank in. It also means the dune face slumped slightly and the ridgeline shifted a few steps. If you had used this ridge as a landmark earlier, you would be wrong now. Not dramatically wrong, just wrong enough to waste an hour, which becomes dangerous later. You keep moving, and the wind returns in pulses. It comes, then vanishes, then comes again, like the place is exhaling unevenly. Each gust lifts dry grains from the crest and skates them over wet patches below. The sand is drying from the top down, sealing itself with a thin crust. Underneath, it stays damp. That is another trap. A crust looks firm until you step and your foot punches through into soft sand. You do it once by accident. Your boot breaks the surface with a quiet crackle, and your ankle twists inward. Not a full injury, but the same warning repeated louder. You adjust instantly. Smaller steps, more deliberate foot placement. The guide glances back, sees it, and slows again. He does not pity you. He just manages the system. You start thinking about how these lagoons exist at all. Not the poetic version, the mechanical version. Rain falls hard here during the wet season, fed by the shift of atmospheric belts. Moist air comes off the Atlantic and gets forced upward, and it dumps water like a broken ceiling. The sand dunes, piled inland by wind, sit like a giant porous dam. Water infiltrates quickly at first, but it does not drain infinitely. Below the surface, there are layers, older sediments, and compacted material that slows the downward flow. So water pools, first as groundwater, then as surface lagoons and low basins. It is like pouring water into a sandbox sitting on a plastic sheet. It will soak in, yes, but if the sheet is there, it will also collect and rise and make pools. You cannot see the sheet. You can only see the pools telling you it exists. And now, after the storm, the pools are bolder. They have fresh edges and new depths, which means your routes narrow. The guide leads you along a chain of basins, using water as a breadcrumb trail, not because you need to drink from it, but because it gives you shape. A lagoon has a unique outline, and it stays put for days, even as sand moves. A dune ridge can change while you blink. A water basin changes slower, like it has more inertia, so you travel by water, even in a desert. The afternoon drags on, and you realize something else about time here. The storm stole daylight from you. Even though it was brief, it forced you low, forced you to wait, forced you to take cautious crossings. Now the sun is already leaning toward late day, and you have not made the distance you wanted. You did not fail. You just met the real scale of the place. Lençóis looks small on a map until you try to cross it on foot. Then it becomes a white continent with no streets and no fixed points. You crest another dune shoulder, and the guide stops longer this time. He scans the horizon where the clouds are still bruised. You can see distant curtains of rain, gray vertical smears far off, not coming for you yet, but possible. Lightning flickers again, faint, like a camera flash behind a wall. The guide points to the west, toward the interior, then to the east, toward the greener edge. His finger makes a choice. He is deciding not to gamble on the far crossing today. He is deciding you will not reach the planned exit by daylight. He does not say it with drama. He says it with route selection. He turns slightly, angling you toward a basin that sits higher and looks sheltered. Tonight's anchor, his posture says. A place to stop, to reset, to not die of ambition. You feel a small disappointment because part of you wanted the neat story. Cross the dunes, reach the green edge, return triumphant, sandy, enlightened. But neat stories are for brochures. Real landscapes do not care about your arc. They care about weather and fatigue and mistakes. So you follow. The basin he chooses is not the largest lagoon. It is not the prettiest. It is practical. It has a dune shoulder high enough to camp above cold air pooling. It has water close enough to access without being at the mercy of its level. And it has a slope angled away from the prevailing wind, meaning fewer grains sandblasting you all night. You walk down into the basin and the air cools. Moisture settles here and you feel it on your skin. The lagoon is clear with a greenish tint now under the clouded sky. The surface is calm, protected by the dune walls. You stand at the edge and listen. No waves, just small lap sounds, like someone turning pages slowly. The guide drops his pack and looks at you. He says a few words. Simple rules. You do not wander after dark. You do not go swimming to feel better. You do not drink straight from the lagoon unless you treat it. Fresh does not mean clean. Fresh just means it did not come from the sea. He kneels and pulls out a small filter. Not a heroic contraption, just a practical one. He fills a bottle from the lagoon, careful not to stir silt. Then he filters it, slowly, watching the flow. It takes time. Time is the cost of not getting sick. You help because you are here now, part of the system. You scoop water gently, and the sand beneath swirls like smoke. Tiny particles rise, then settle. You wait until it clears before filling again. This becomes a ritual. Scoop, wait, fill, filter. The sun starts to break through in patches as the storm moves off. Light spills onto certain dune faces, making them glow like lit fabric. Other faces stay gray. The whole field becomes a quilt of brightness and shadow. You look up and see the sky thinning, but not calming. It feels like the weather is deciding what mood it wants for the night. The guide finishes filling the bottles. He checks your remaining food and his own. Not much. A few bars, some dried snacks, enough to keep your body from complaining too loudly. Not enough to celebrate. He points up the dune shoulder where you will sleep. You climb, and you feel the sand shift under your weight. Even here, where it looks stable, it moves. You pick a spot slightly below the crest so the wind goes over you instead of into you. The guide shows you how to dig a shallow depression with your heel, a small hollow to block gusts, a crude nest. You set your gear down, and the dampness in your clothes starts to cool fast as the sun lowers. This is the desert's other personality. It can cook you all day, then chill you at night, because sand holds heat badly. No trees to trap warmth, no rocks to radiate it back, just grains that heat up, then give it away as soon as the light leaves. You sit and you feel the temperature drop in layers. First your shoulders, then your arms, then your fingers. The guide starts a small stove, shielded from wind. He boils a little filtered water, not for luxury, but for safety. Heat is a disinfectant and also a comfort. A warm sip tells your body it is not abandoned. As the water heats, you watch the lagoon below, and that is when you notice the movement again. Not just one fish, several tiny darting shapes near the edge, weaving through the shallow water. Your brain still finds it slightly offensive. Life where life should have no time. The guide explains again, more fully now that you are stopped. When the lagoons dry, many of these creatures leave eggs behind. Some eggs survive months, buried in damp sand, waiting. Other species arrive when floods connect basins to rivers. During the wettest weeks, water from the nearby rivers spills outward. Not enough to turn this into a permanent marsh, but enough to create temporary corridors. Fish ride those corridors in. Then the corridors vanish, and the fish are stranded in paradise with an expiration date. So they adapt. Fast growth, quick breeding, eggs that can sleep. A whole ecosystem built on impermanence. You sip warm water, and you feel your muscles unclench. Your body is tired, but your mind keeps working. You think about humans here, about how people time their lives to the same cycles. The guide mentions communities near the park, places that swell with visitors when the lagoons are full. Tourism is seasonal, like the water. Jobs appear, then vanish, like the lagoons themselves. Even roads are temporary, tracks across sand that get erased and redrawn, depending on wind and rain. People live at the edge of a place that refuses permanence, and they build schedules around it anyway. That is what humans do. We build calendars on top of moving ground and act surprised when it shifts. The light softens into late afternoon. The dunes turn slightly pink, not from romance, but from the sun's angle. Long shadows return, and suddenly, the landscape looks readable again. Ridges become distinct. Basins become obvious. You can see where you walked today, not by footprints, those are gone, but by the logic of the route. Water to water, shoulder to shoulder, avoiding high lines when lightning threatened. It is a path written in choices, not marks. As dusk approaches, the wind changes tone. It becomes steadier, more insistent. Fine grains start to tick against your gear, a soft tapping, like rain, but drier. The dunes are drying, and the wind is back to work. It is resuming the job it never stopped doing, moving sand inland, grain by grain, night after night. You lie back in your shallow hollow. The sky above is clearing now, and stars begin to show through thinning cloud. The lagoon below darkens quickly, turning from green-blue to slate, then to black. A black mirror reflecting the first stars. making the sky look doubled. This is where the false security arrives. It feels peaceful. The wind is a lullaby. The water is still. Your body wants to believe you are safe, but you know now that safety here is a set of rules, not a feeling. Stay near the guide, stay on the shoulder. Do not wander. Do not trust your own sense of direction in the dark, because darkness turns dunes into identical shapes and water into a trap made of reflection. The guide checks his light once, a small beam, then turns it off. No wasted battery, no beacon to tempt your curiosity. He tells you again, quietly, that if you need to move, you wake him. Not because he is controlling, but because you are both vulnerable to the same stupid impulse. The impulse to step out for a better view, to climb the crest and feel tall, to look at distant lightning or a star cluster or the black chain of lagoons, to do one small extra thing. And in Lençóis, one small extra thing can become a long problem. Night settles fully. The temperature keeps dropping. Your damp clothes finally dry, but the dryness comes with chill. You pull what you can around your shoulders. Sand ticks softly against fabric. You can hear it moving across the crest above you. A faint hiss. You are sleeping on a surface that is actively migrating. Not fast, not enough to notice in a minute, enough to know that by the time you leave, your hollow will already be softer, already filling, already being erased. Your eyes get heavy and the stars sharpen. The lagoon below reflects them with annoying perfection. Up and down become negotiable. You could stare into the water and feel like you are staring into space. That is the disorientation. It sneaks in without force. It makes your brain forget where the ground is. And then, sometime later, you hear it again. Distant thunder, far enough to be background. A reminder that weather is still nearby, still possible. You roll slightly, trying to get comfortable. Your muscles ache in that dull way. The ache that feels like you earned something. You did not earn anything. You simply survived the day. You are about to close your eyes when curiosity crawls back in. You tell yourself you just want to check the sky. You tell yourself you just want one look at the lagoon chain in the distance. You tell yourself it will take a minute. Congratulations. This is how night problems begin. You sit up slowly, trying not to wake the guide. The wind feels colder upright. Stars fill the whole dome, and the dunes are pale humps, barely there. You step out of your hollow, careful, quiet. The sand under your feet is cooler now, almost cold. It holds your footprints more clearly because the surface crust has formed. It feels, briefly, reassuring. You climb a few steps toward the crest, and the view opens. More lagoons than you realized, scattered like dark coins between white ridges. Far away, faint lightning flickers behind clouds. Silent from this distance, it looks beautiful, and distant, and harmless. Your brain starts to drift into awe. Then the wind gusts, and sand skates over your footprints, not erasing them fully, just softening edges. You watch it happen, and the awe turns into a small pinch of worry. You take another step, just to the crest. From here, the lagoon below is a perfect black mirror, stars reflected. Your own silhouette doubled, standing between two skies. The world feels upside down for a moment. You blink, and your inner ear protests. You turn to look back at camp, and the camp is not where your mind insists it should be. It is nearby. It has to be nearby. You only walked for a minute, but the dune shoulder behind you looks unfamiliar in starlight. The hollow you made looks like every other shallow depression. The guide's shape is a darker patch among darker patches. You feel the first real drop of adrenaline in your stomach. Not panic yet, just the cold realization that you cannot point confidently at your own starting point. You start to walk back, and you stop yourself, because walking back in the wrong direction is how you make this worse. You stand still, forcing your breathing to slow. You listen. No voices, no obvious gear sounds. You hear only wind, moving sand like a soft broom across a tile floor. You hear water, far below, a small lap that offers no direction. You hear your own breathing too loud, too close, like an animal in your ear. So you do the first smart thing you have done in the last 5 minutes. You stop adding new variables. You lower your shoulders, unclench your jaw, and let your eyes adjust fully. Because the dunes are not black at night, they are pale. And pale things still have shape if you give them time. You face into the wind and feel it press against one cheek more than the other. That tells you where the crest is, because wind likes the high line. You turn your head until the pressure evens out. Now you are aimed roughly along the shoulder, not into the basin. Congratulations, you have found a compass made of air and arrogance. You take one slow step down from the crest, back toward where you think camp should be. Your foot sinks with a dry hiss. You pause again and test the sand with the toe of your boot. The surface crust cracks and softer sand gives way underneath. That means you are slightly lower than you were and closer to the damp shoulder. Damp sand holds the day longer and it cools slower at night. You do not feel warmer, but you feel less exposed. You keep your steps small, not because you are afraid of falling, because each step is also a decision you may need to undo. You reach down and pinch a bit of sand between your fingers. It feels cooler than the crest sand, and it clumps faintly. That tells you you are near the line where moisture lingers. Moisture lingers near the lagoon and near your camp above it, so you keep your body parallel to the water, not toward it. If you walk toward the lagoon, you will find it. And finding the lagoon is not the same as finding safety. The lagoon is a black mirror with a shoreline that moves when you do. You angle sideways instead, tracing the contour like you are following a map line. A map line you can feel with your feet. You move for what feels like 5 minutes, but is probably 1. Time stretches in the dark because your brain is doing extra work. Then you see it, a faint point of light that should not be there. Not a star, too low, too steady, a pinprick glow, filtered through fabric, like a firefly trapped in a pocket. The guide, smart and irritating, has cracked his light just enough to be seen, not enough to advertise to the whole dune field, but enough to catch you. You exhale hard, and the relief feels almost embarrassing. You keep walking, slow and careful, toward that small human signal. As you get closer, you see the shape of your hollow again. You see your pack, a darker lump, and the guide sitting upright like he never moved. He does not shout, because shouting wastes breath and dignity. He just looks at you and lifts his chin once. "Come back into the fold," his posture says, "and stop auditioning for disaster." You sit down, and the sand sighs under you, making space like it was waiting. Your heart keeps beating fast for a minute, then begins to settle. The guide says something quietly, and it is not comforting. "Next time you wake me first," he says, simple and final. You nod, because there is no argument that makes you look better. You lie back again, and you force your eyes to stop chasing the horizon. The wind keeps ticking sand against your gear. It sounds like someone sprinkling salt on a table endlessly. And you realize how the dunes win at night. Not with cliffs, not with teeth, but with sameness. In daylight, every ridge has a face, and every basin has a color. At night, everything becomes one palette, pale gray on deeper gray, and your brain, desperate for pattern, starts inventing landmarks. It says, that hump is the camp hump. It says, that slope is the slope you climbed. It says, you can trust your instincts because you have walked all day. But instincts evolved for forests and savannas, not for a moving bedsheet of quartz. So you make yourself a promise you can keep. You stop moving unless there is a reason that includes survival. You stop looking for beauty in the distance, and you look for warmth nearby. You tuck your hands into your shirt, and you let your shoulders curl forward. The guide does the same, because pride does not generate heat. The temperature keeps dropping, not dramatically, just steadily, like the planet is turning a dial. Sand has almost no patience for holding warmth. It heats fast in the sun and cools fast in the dark. That is why deserts feel like they change personalities at sunset. And this place, pretending to be a desert, copies the same trick. You feel the chill in your knees first because you crossed water too many times. Then in your lower back because you sweated and then dried. You do not sleep deeply. Not at first. You drift. You wake. You drift again. Each time you wake, the stars have rotated slightly, and the lagoon looks different. Sometimes it is perfectly still, a polished void. Sometimes wind roughens it, breaking the reflection into shards. Once, you hear a distant splash, and your brain offers you options. A fish, a bird, a trick of sound. The guide does not move, so you let the mystery stay a mystery. Hours pass in that way, with no clear seam between them. The wind rises and falls, and each gust drags a thin veil of sand over the crest. You can feel it settle on your sleeves, on your cheek, like powdered sugar. When you brush it away, more arrives. This is the dunes doing what dunes do, even while you pretend to rest. They are migrating while you are horizontal. They are erasing while you are dreaming. You are not camping on ground. You are camping on motion. Paused. Eventually, the blackness behind your eyelids begins to lighten. Not because the sun is up, but because the sky is thinning from ink to charcoal. You sit up slowly, and your joints complain in small ways. Your ankle, the one that twisted earlier, feels stiff but functional. You flex it carefully, and it holds. The guide stands, stretches, and looks toward the east. He does not need a watch to know the timing. The birds in the green edge will announce the day long before you hear them. But first, the dunes announce it. A faint blush creeps over the highest ridges. The white sand turns soft pink, then pale gold, and the lagoons change color in seconds. Black becomes deep cobalt, then bright blue, then that impossible turquoise that makes people forget to drink water. The place looks freshly made, like yesterday never happened. Like storms and mistakes are myths, you stand and look down at the lagoon below your camp. The shoreline is higher than it was before the squall, still wet above the current edge. Evidence that the storm was not just noise, it was volume. It poured new water into the basins, and the basins answered by swelling. Now, in the cool dawn, the water looks calm and harmless again. But you know, it is a temporary guest. Even now, it is seeping downward, draining through sand like time through fingers. You drink from your filtered bottle, careful, slow. The water tastes slightly flat, like water that has been strained through stone, because it has. Quartz does not add flavor, but it changes the feel. It is clean in a way that feels engineered, even though nothing here was built for you. The guide eats a small amount, and you do the same. Food is not celebration, it is fuel. You pack quickly, because mornings are gifts with short return windows. Soon the sun will climb and the dunes will start lying to you again. Distance will stretch, heat will flatten shadows, and every ridge will look easy until you step on it. The guide takes you up to a higher crest than last night. Not the highest, just high enough to get a wide view before the glare builds. You climb, and the sand is cool, almost silky. Each step leaves a crisp print in the crust. Behind you, the prints look official, like proof. But you know how quickly they will soften once wind warms up. At the crest, you stop, and the world opens. Dunes fold away in every direction, white on white, like frozen surf. Lagoons sit between them like spilled sky. And then you see something you have been chasing mentally for days. A thin green line at the far edge, stubborn and real. Scrub and small trees, low vegetation, the beginning of anchored land. Not a forest, not paradise, just a boundary where roots start acting like nails. The guide points toward it, and you feel a strange gratitude for something so unimpressive. Green means friction. Green means the sand is not free to migrate as fast. Green means you can orient by something that will still be there tomorrow. You start walking, and today, the strategy is different. No heroic shortcuts, no ridge cutting to save time. You follow a chain of lagoons that angle toward the green edge. Water as breadcrumbs. Again, each basin you pass gives you a reference point you can describe. Long and thin, crescent-shaped with a steep southern wall. Round and deep, with a fresh slump on the eastern lip. These details are not poetry. They are a map your brain can hold. The guide keeps you on dune shoulders, not in the deepest troughs. Troughs trap cool air at night, and they trap confusion in daylight. Shoulders give you breeze, and a view, and a path that feels consistent. You walk in the morning cool, and it feels almost easy. That is the seduction. Your legs, tired from yesterday, loosen up and start cooperating. Your lungs feel less heavy. You begin to believe you might make the green edge by late morning. Congratulations, you have started negotiating with a place that does not bargain. The first lagoon in your new chain is wider than you expected. It was likely filled by last night's runoff and infiltration. The guide stops and studies it, then chooses a route around the narrow end. Not through, not today. You accept the detour without arguing because you remember the dark. You remember how easy it was to misplace a camp by 20 steps. You walk along the rim where the sand is darker and firmer. Your boots leave shallow imprints that do not crumble as much. That is moisture working like glue, binding grains together briefly. But you also see small cracks, like the surface is drying and shrinking. The crust forms, then fractures, then becomes loose again. A cycle that can happen in a single morning. You pass another lagoon where tiny fish flash near the shallows. In the new daylight, you see them clearly. Small bodies, quick movements, living in a calendar that includes disappearance. You think about their eggs, buried in sand like seeds, waiting for rain as a resurrection plan. And it makes you look at the dunes differently, not as empty, but as storage. Sand is not just grains. It is a vault for water, for eggs, for heat, for cold. It holds things, briefly, and then lets them go. As you walk, you start noticing other life. Not much, but enough to change the feeling of the place. A small bird cuts across a basin, low and fast, then vanishes behind a ridge. Insects flicker near the damp margins, tiny specks that appear only when the air is still. They live on the thin boundary where water meets sand. A shoreline is a buffet, even in a desert disguise. The guide points to a faint track in one trough, barely visible. A path used by people who do this often, he says. Not a road, not marked, just a repeated preference pressed into sand by feet and tires when conditions allow. It leads toward a distant community near the park edge. A seasonal line, like everything else. You follow it for a while, not because it is reliable, but because it is comforting. Evidence that other humans have solved this puzzle before you. The sun climbs higher, and the light begins to flatten again. Shadows shorten, and the dunes lose contrast. But now, you have direction, and you have a plan built on caution. You stop drinking like you are panicking. You sip on schedule, small amounts. You keep your mouth closed when gusts hit, because sand in teeth becomes its own problem. The guide sets a pace that is unglamorous and effective. You crest a ridge and see the green edge closer now. Not close, but closer enough to look textured. You can pick out darker clumps that might be trees, lighter patches that might be grass. The air changes slightly too. A faint earthy smell, soil rather than open water. It is subtle, but your brain grabs it like a rope. Soil means the sand is mixing with organic matter. Organic matter means plants have been dying there long enough to leave residue. That is how land begins to act like land. You walk down into a trough where the sand is still damp from the storm. It is easier to walk on, packed and supportive. But the guide keeps you from stepping too close to the steepest dune faces. Wet sand can slump without warning, and a small slide can bury your foot, twist your knee. Out here, a minor injury is a major negotiation. You keep to gentler slopes, and you notice the storm's edits everywhere. Fresh scallops on lagoon edges, small, fan-shaped deposits where runoff briefly flowed and then vanished. A dune crest that looks slightly shaved, its sharp line softened. Yesterday's landscape is gone, replaced by a near copy. That is what makes this place dangerous. It does not change enough to announce itself. It changes enough to invalidate confidence. Mid-morning arrives, and the heat begins to build again, not as brutal as yesterday, but present. The white sand reflects light into your face, and your eyes narrow. Your skin starts sweating again, and the sweat sticks because humidity is still high. This is the coastal influence. The Atlantic is not far in terms of weather, even if you cannot see it. Moisture rides inland on winds, making heat feel heavier. A dry desert lets sweat evaporate and cool you. This place makes you marinate in your own effort. The guide stops at a lagoon that sits like a long ribbon. On the far side, the dunes thin, and you can see more vegetation scattered between ridges. This is a decision point. You can cross the lagoon directly, saving distance, or you can walk its full length, staying dry but adding time. The guide looks at the sky, then at the waterline. No storm building right now, but the day is warming fast. He chooses the crossing, and you follow, because sometimes the risky option is the efficient one. You step in, and the water is warmer than last night's storm-filled basin. The bottom is firm, and the crossing is steady. Halfway through, you pause and look down at your legs through clear blue. You see how the sand beneath forms ripples, even underwater. Wind shaped the surface, then water filled it, preserving the pattern. It is like a fingerprint set in glass, and you understand something simple and unsettling. Water is not the opposite of sand here. Water and sand are collaborators. Wind builds the basins by moving dunes. Rain fills the basins by falling into them. Then seepage drains them, and wind rearranges the bowl again. A cycle of construction and demolition. You climb out, dripping, and the guide pushes you onward. The green edge is closer, and now you can hear it faintly. Not voices, not machines. Insects, a thin buzz that carries on the breeze, sound of life that meets plants. You crest another ridge and see something that looks almost ridiculous. A small cluster of bushes, a few hardy shrubs anchored in sand. They look like they are clinging to the world with stubborn fingers. Their roots hold the dune face in place, creating a slightly different shape. A dune with vegetation has a spine. A dune without it is a suggestion. You walk toward those shrubs, and the sand begins to change texture. It becomes slightly darker, mixed with organic crumbs. You see bits of dead leaves, tiny twigs, things that do not belong in pure dune fields. This is the transition zone, the seam between moving and held. The guide slows, not because the walking is harder, because this is where people appear, not suddenly, but in traces. A piece of plastic caught in a bush, carried by wind from somewhere human. A faint tire track that cuts along the edge, where vehicles sometimes run when conditions allow. A small pile of ash, old and cold, where someone camped weeks ago. Evidence that humans, like fish, time their presence to the season. When lagoons are full, people come, guides work, tours run, photos happen. Then water drains, and the place becomes less marketable, and the human tide recedes. The dunes keep going either way. You finally reach a stretch of firmer ground, where sand is mixed with tougher soil. Your boots feel the difference immediately. The ground resists your step instead of yielding. Your calves relax slightly, grateful, and plants become more common. Small grasses and scrub, low but persistent. The guide points back toward the dunes you crossed. From here, the white field looks smooth again, like a cloth laid out for display. You can almost forget the effort of climbing and sliding. You can almost forget the cold water, the storm, the night confusion. Almost, because the storm's mark is still visible even from here. Some lagoons are higher than their neighbors newly filled. Some dune faces have fresh scars, pale slides where sand slumped. The landscape looks clean, but it is bruised in subtle ways. You walk farther into the green edge, and the air smells more like soil and leaves. Humidity changes too, becoming less reflective and more grounded. You begin to hear birds clearly now, small calls from hidden branches. The guide leads you toward a faint path that will eventually connect to a track near the park boundary, a way out that feels, finally, like a way out. But as you walk, you keep looking back because the dunes refuse to be dismissed. They continue migrating behind you, grain by grain. Wind still combs the crests, smoothing and sharpening at the same time. And the lagoons, even now, are beginning their slow drain. You can almost feel that drainage happening under your soles, like the sand is quietly swallowing a secret. It is not dramatic. It is patient. It is the kind of patience that makes humans build the wrong kind of confidence. You keep walking into the greener edge, and the first thing you notice is friction. Not emotional friction, literal friction. Roots grab the sand and refuse to let it slide. Your boots stop surfing. They start stepping. The guide's shoulders loosen a fraction, as if he can finally stop negotiating with every grain. You pass a patch of scrub that looks like it was assembled from leftovers. Twisted stems, small waxy leaves, thorns that exist purely to punish curiosity. These plants are not here to be pretty. They are here to be stubborn enough to exist. The sand here is no longer pure white. It is beige, then pale brown, then mottled with dark crumbs of decayed leaf. Soil is just death with good marketing, but it does a job. It holds water differently. It holds heat differently. And it holds you differently, which is what your knees care about. Behind you, the dune field looks smoother from this angle, like it is trying to apologize. It is lying. Distance softens the evidence of struggle, the same way photos soften bad decisions. Up close, those dunes were a treadmill. From here, they are a blanket. You let your eyes trace the line where white gives up and green begins. It is not a clean border. It is a messy negotiation zone, a place where sand still wants to move and roots still want to stop it. That border shifts too, season to season, storm to storm, as if the park itself cannot decide what shape it wants. The guide steers you toward a faint track pressed into the mixed soil by repeated feet. Not a road, a preference, a habit. And habits, you learn, are the closest thing humans have to permanence out here. As you follow it, you hear more sound than you have heard in 2 days. Insects buzzing in short bursts, birds making quick calls from somewhere you cannot see, leaves scratching each other in the breeze. The world is no longer just wind and water and sand. It has texture again. It has clutter, and clutter, weirdly, is comforting. Because clutter means landmarks. Landmarks mean you can make a mistake and still recover. In the dunes, mistakes were blank. Here, mistakes have context. You stop once, not because you are lost, but because your body remembers it can pause safely. Your calves pulse with that delayed ache, the kind you feel after walking on unstable ground all day. The guide hands you a final bottle of filtered water, topped off from the last lagoon. He watches you drink, and you can tell he is doing the math again. How much water remains? How long until shade? How long until you meet someone else? Or at least a vehicle track you can follow. He points ahead to a darker clump of trees that looks almost like a real forest from this distance. That is where the sand loses control, he says, and the land starts acting like land. You start moving again, and the air changes in small steps. Less reflective heat, more trapped warmth under leaves. Less salt on your lips, more earthy smell in your nose. The humidity is still there because the coast is still nearby, but it feels different. In the dunes, humidity was a weight with nowhere to go. Here, it has surfaces to cling to. It becomes dew on leaves. It becomes a film on bark. It becomes something that belongs. You pass a low area where the ground is damp, and you see tiny footprints, bird tracks, three-pronged stamps, lizard marks, a light drag between dotted steps. Small evidence that something lives here full-time, not just seasonally. That is the revelation you do not get in the white field. Lençóis is not one environment. It is a set of environments stacked against each other, like mismatched furniture, a coastal dune machine, a rain-fed lagoon system, a scrubby transition zone. And beyond this, rivers and mangroves in the Atlantic, all taking turns shaping each other. You keep thinking about the sand, because it is still the main character even when you leave it. Where does it go when it decides to leave? The question sounds simple, and it is not. Sand is not one thing. It is a supply chain. It is a budget. It is an argument between river and ocean and wind. The guide answers by pointing in three directions, like a tired professor with better footwear. Upstream, he says, the rivers bring sediment down from interior Brazil, not as sand at first, but as finer material, silt and clay and broken rock, all delivered by rain and gravity. Then, closer to the coast, waves and currents sort it. They take the messy mix and do what the ocean always does. They grade it like an unforgiving teacher. Fine particles drift away, heavier grains stay. Quartz, stubborn and durable, survives the abuse. It piles up on beaches, then the wind takes over. Trade winds pick up the dry grains and push them inland, not in one heroic gust, but in countless small shoves, a slow conveyor belt that never clocks out. So when you look at those dunes, you are not looking at ancient desert sand. You are looking at recycled coastline, delivered and re-delivered until it becomes its own landscape. And the lagoons, those bright insults to desert logic, exist because the sand arrived faster than it could drain completely. Because the rainy season arrives with enough force to fill basins before the sand can drink them dry. Because below the dunes, there are layers that slow drainage, old sediments packed tighter, holding water close to the surface. A shallow freshwater lens, perched and temporary, like a rumor that lasts a few months. You walk on, and you realize another uncomfortable detail. That freshwater lens is not guaranteed. It depends on rain that is not evenly distributed. Some years, the lagoons fill spectacularly. Other years, they barely appear. Tourism schedules do not like that. Neither do the communities that depend on visitors arriving at the right time to see the postcard version. The guide does not say climate change. He does not have to. He just describes the pattern shifting, rainy seasons arriving late or ending early, or coming in weird bursts that flood fast and then vanish. A place built on timing becomes fragile when timing changes. And you, of course, chose to experience it on foot, which is the least forgiving way to learn that lesson. The path dips into a patch of taller vegetation, and shade finally lands on your shoulders like a physical object. You slow down automatically because your body recognizes relief before your mind does. The light under the trees is greenish and dim, and for a moment, you feel like you have stepped into a different country. Bird calls bounce between branches. Leaves move in the breeze, making a sound like paper rubbing together. Your skin stops radiating heat. You can breathe without tasting sand. The guide pauses here and lets you sit on a fallen branch that feels offensively solid. You flex your ankle again. It is stiff, but it holds. You roll your shoulders and feel grains of sand trapped in seams of fabric. Still, Lençóis is leaving with you. You drink, and the water tastes the same, flat and clean. But now, the background flavor is leaf smell, not open dune air. The guide takes out his phone again, checks it, and you see a faint bar of signal flicker and die. He snorts softly, like the device is being dramatic for attention. Signal here is a patchwork, and you are not the priority. He puts it away and stands. We keep moving, he says, because shade is a stop, not a destination. The day is still heating up, and you still need to reach a place where someone can find you without poetry. You follow him down the path, and you begin to see clearer signs of people. A fence line, half buried in sand in one spot, anchored in soil in another. A narrow wooden footbridge over a damp patch, built by someone who got tired of wet feet. A plastic bottle wedged under roots, sun-bleached and brittle. Human artifacts look sad here, not because nature is pure, but because nature is indifferent. Plastic does not impress dunes. Fences do not stop wind, and a footbridge, for all its good intentions, will still rot on schedule. The guide leads you toward a wider track, and the ground firms up again, more compacted by tires. You hear an engine far off, a thin mechanical whine. It does not sound close, but it sounds possible. And possible is a powerful thing after 2 days of white silence. You step out of the trees and into a clearing where the sand is thinner, scattered like a spill rather than a blanket. From here, you can see the dunes again, and now you can see the whole system in one glance. A river line in the distance, darker green, hinting at water moving year-round. A broad, pale field where dunes still dominate. And in the low spots, those startling blue lagoons, shrinking already at the edges. The guide points to a particular basin you crossed yesterday, and it looks different now. The shoreline is lower. The water has retreated a little, leaving a darker ring of wet sand like a bathtub stain. This is the drain in action, not a metaphor. Sun pulls water upward into air. Sand pulls water downward into pores. Between those two forces, the lagoon loses, slowly, politely. With no complaint, you watch a tiny rivulet at the edge, not flowing outward, but sinking inward. Water seeping into sand in a thin line, disappearing as it goes. It is like watching money leave your account in microtransactions. You barely feel it until it is gone. The guide tells you something that makes you look back at the dunes with new suspicion. During the wettest months, he says, some lagoons connect not with visible rivers, but with shallow flooding that turns low corridors into temporary channels. Fish move then. People move then too, using routes that do not exist in the dry season. And when the dry season arrives, those same corridors become traps, flat and tempting, leading you deeper into the dunes with no water left to justify them. A route can be safe in July and lethal in October, and the land does not post updates. You keep walking along the track, and the heat grows again as you leave shade behind. But it is different heat now. It has interruptions. A tree here, a bush there, a dip in terrain that offers a cooler pocket. In the dunes, heat was a uniform policy. Here, it is local governance. You pass a small dwelling set back from the track, a simple structure with a tin roof half hidden by scrub. No one comes out? Maybe no one is home. Maybe they are watching you and deciding you are not worth the effort. The guide raises a hand in a casual greeting anyway. A ritual, a sign of respect, or maybe just insurance. You realize that for locals, the dunes are not a fantasy landscape. They are a neighbor that behaves badly. A source of work, a source of water, a source of danger, a source of tourists who underestimate distance, a place you visit for wonder, a place they manage for survival. The track bends, and the sound of an engine grows louder. A vehicle appears, a battered four-wheel drive with sand-stained tires, moving slowly, as if it has learned humility. It passes you with a small wave from the driver and a puff of dust that smells like hot earth instead of dune salt. The guide watches it go, then looks at you. This is the line, his expression says. You are back in the world where machines can exist. You could almost relax, but Lençóis does not like clean exits, because as you walk, you notice clouds building again, not dark, not storm-heavy, but thickening in a way that suggests afternoon mischief. The guide notices too. He picks up pace, and you follow because you have learned the cost of being slow under open sky. The track leads toward a low rise where the vegetation thins, and beyond it, you can see a broader landscape opening, a river plain, greener and flatter. And in the far distance, a shimmering line that might be water reflecting light, maybe the river, maybe something else. The air smells more complex here, a mix of damp soil, plant resin, and something faintly brackish. Salt is returning to the story. The closer you get to the coast, the more the ocean's influence seeps into everything, like gossip. The guide stops at a shallow ditch where water has pooled from recent rain. It is brownish, full of leaf bits, not the clean lagoon blue. He points at it and gives you a look that is almost amused. This, he says, is what water looks like when it touches life and dirt. The lagoons looked pure because they were filtered through sand. with almost nothing organic to stain them. Here, water picks up color immediately. Clean is not the same as safe, and clear is not the same as sterile. But the contrast is telling. The dunes are a filter. The green edge is a compost pile. Both are natural. Both have consequences. You step over the ditch and your boot sinks slightly into mud, real mud, the kind that grabs and does not let go. It feels almost insulting after sand that always gave way politely. Mud is clingy. Mud wants a relationship. You pull your foot free with a soft sucking sound and keep going. The guide glances back at the dune field one more time, and you follow his gaze. You can see the wind working even now, a faint haze of grains lifting off crests. You can see how dunes march in lines shaped by consistent winds, like a comb dragged through flour. And you can see how close the whole system is to water sources that should dissolve it. That is the weirdness that makes this place famous, and also makes it fragile. A desert that is not a desert. A wet season that pretends to be a lake district. A landscape built from borrowed sand, filled with borrowed rain, drained by borrowed time. The guide starts talking about the river now, because you are close enough for it to matter. The Preguices River, he says, is one of the lifelines here. It runs toward the Atlantic, winding through lowlands, sometimes spilling outward in the wet months. It helps feed the system, not by pouring directly into every lagoon, but by raising groundwater and flooding margins. Water does not need to be visible to influence a landscape. It can move underground, slow and quiet, pushing up into basins when the season allows. That hidden movement is why lagoons can persist longer than you would expect from sand alone. Water is not just sitting on top, it is stored below, like a savings account that gets drained slowly. You ask, without words, why the dunes are here in the first place if the region gets so much rain. The guide answers with the simple cruelty of wind. Rain does not stop sand from moving if the sand has no roots. And sand will accumulate anywhere there is a consistent supply and a consistent push. The coast supplies, the wind pushes, the river delivers sediment that the ocean sorts into usable grain sizes. It is a collaboration between forces that do not care about what you call it. Desert, beach, park, wonder. Those are human labels. The system just runs. Ahead, the track meets a slightly wider road, still rough, but clearly maintained. There is a sign, sun-faded, marking the park boundary area. Letters that look too official for a place that refuses permanence. You stop near it, and the guide checks his phone again. This time, signal appears weak but real. He makes a quick call, short and practical, arranging a pickup point. He speaks like someone ordering logistics, not like someone telling an adventure story. That is another reality check. Your crossing was never meant to be a myth. It was meant to be a route. And routes have pickups. While you wait, you sit on a low concrete block that exists purely because humans insisted it should. It is warm from the sun, and it feels unnaturally solid. Your body sinks into the stillness, and now that you are not moving, you feel everything you ignored. Salt crust on your neck, sand grit behind your knees, a hot spot on your heel where a blister tried to form. The dull ache in your thighs from the climb and slide treadmill. And underneath all that, a quiet satisfaction that you did not turn your small mistakes into a catastrophe. You watch the sky because you cannot stop watching it now. Clouds are building more, swelling into taller shapes inland. The guide notices, and he stands restless. Storms do not care if you are done walking. They arrive on schedule that only the atmosphere understands. You hear the vehicle before you see it. Another engine. Closer. A four-wheel drive approaches, slower than you want, but steady. It stops, and the driver leans out, exchanging words with the guide. You catch only fragments, mentions of water levels, road conditions, the storm yesterday. It is clear they have both been watching the same landscape and both know how quickly it changes. You climb into the back, and the seat feels like luxury even though it is just vinyl and dust. As the vehicle starts moving, you look back over the scrub and see the white dunes again, fading into the distance. From here, they look peaceful. From here, they look like a static sculpture. But you know better now. You know the wind is still combing them. You know the water is still draining. You know the lagoons are still shrinking, quietly, with no audience required. The ride bumps along, and the vegetation thickens as you move farther from the dune field. You pass more small houses, more fences, more signs of people living with the seasonal logic. Some yards have boats pulled up on land, waiting for water that will return when the rains come. Some have stacks of plastic chairs waiting for tourists who arrive when blue lagoons are full. Everything here is set up for a calendar written by weather. That is the human adaptation. Not conquering the dunes, scheduling around them. The vehicle climbs a small rise, and the view opens to a river channel, wider and darker than any lagoon. The water here is moving, carrying sediment